Hello and most welcome to 1648 of the Heidegger series. We will continue with Wittgenstein's Rethinking the Inner by Paul Johnston, and we will start with making a little summary of the chapters we've gone through. We are nearing the end, and it is time to sort of recap and gather what sort of understanding we have come to. The first two chapters, especially the second one, the second and the third one, the world of the senses, we looked very carefully into what is the inner experience. Is there an original first experience that starts everything? Especially when it comes to thinking, one of the first questions to ask is thinking a sort of inner speech, or could it be a picture? Johnston and Wittgenstein give two different options here. The first one is that thinking could be a sort of ongoing talking, a long stream of words that incessantly covers different areas, go in different directions. Explore, invent, making new discoveries, thinking that could give upheaval in the inside. It could stir emotions, thinking about things of the past that happened, and it can aggravate emotions. Stir in the inside. And I think the idea of thinking as a sort of inner speech is in many ways very attractive, because almost ever when we think about it, what did I think, we will reformulate or formulate our thinking into words, sentences. That also goes when we speak to others. Most likely, we will tell others that I thought this and that, and you will express those thinkings, those thoughts in words and nothing else. I thought of going to visit my uncle this weekend, for instance. You tell somebody there, but you're letting in the friend on what you are planning, not exactly what your thought process has been. And in my, I want to put in a little wedge there in between. It seems that the difference is absolutely negotiable or negligible. It is like there is exactly more or less the same thing. But according to Wittgenstein Johnson, there is a big difference. There is actually a chiasm in between the two. When you say you want to go and visit your uncle, or that you've been thinking of visiting your uncle, you are in a specific purpose, and the other person is not strictly only interested in your thinking process, but what is your intent? What are your plans? What are you thinking to do in the next weekend? Maybe he wants to do something with you, or he's just curious about your life in general because he's a good friend. There are several options, but none of the options is that he's strictly interested in your thinking process. And neither are you. You could reflect on the thinking, but the reflection is not what thinking is. The reflection takes the same language game as the outward. There is no private understanding of your thinking process. It is limited to what you say. What you say is what you said. There is a nice quote here on page 69 in the Mystery of Thought chapter. One could only report the words of the conversation, and external circumstances under which it was carried on, but not also the meaning that these words had for the speaker. If someone said to himself, or out loud, "I hope to see Ensign," it would make no sense to ask, "And which person of that name did you mean?" For all that he did say was to say these words. The expression is all there is, and that's enough. Adding an extra internal text mass would clarify anything. Once more, too often we are looking for explanations, an ulterior cause. One solution, so to speak, that I have mentioned before is that you add yet another concept, and that would be the concept of meaning. But meaning doesn't clarify how the word is used, and I would say it doesn't help much with understanding of the inner thoughts as well. Meaning has its place in the language game. But how much its meaning is able to clarify things is a completely different question. I think, in a way, how we even turn this and adding supplements like meaning, we will in the end strand with that we do not really understand. It seems that thinking could be that well of things that gives the exactness to the words. That's another conclusion that is very easy to sort of fall into, but I'm far from sure about that one either. if I understood correctly, Wittgenstein, Johnston are more pointing towards that they are absolutely different language games. You can say the language game of thinking and the one of talking about thinking. Sort of, in a way, communicating thinking to others. And we confound them because they have similarities that sort of trick us into confusing them for either being of the same, or I will say even more common to think that from one of them the other one stems. So maybe this speechless thinking or inner speech is the originator of what you say about it. And what you say about it is a sort of resume or review of the thinking processes that has been going on in your head. That is a conclusion, when looking more carefully, makes very little sense. It's very hard to put it in a living language. What purpose will this inner language have when it doesn't participate in the outside? As we already established, rules need to be public for them to be operable and working. Without outsideness, there couldn't be rules to follow. The rules, so to speak, come from the interaction with the outsideness, with its purposes, with its different aspects. In this mold only can rules evolve that tell us how to use the words, how to regulate them. The outsideness is rule giver. If you like, you could call it the apeiron, from where the rules are stemming, where boundaries are evolving, establishing themselves, giving us the necessity of frontiers to be able to do things. And it's also changeable in many aspects. It doesn't absolutely remain the same. All these traits are of great importance to give stamina, energy to language, to our words. You can also say grammar is not a restrictive thing, it's a possibility. It is what makes going forward possible. And that could be compared to meaning in itself, that I would say is very restrictive. It seems like freedom, it smells like freedom, but it doesn't do its job. It doesn't guide, form and develop the language games. It's a sort of stopping point when things do not seem to be brought forward. You could also compare the rules to a lever that raises something well beyond where it originally was. So language is never fixed, it's not monosemic, forever grounded in something without possibility of developing beyond that. The other option, the option with thinking as pictures or imagery, has also a lot of things to it. We often use phrases, "You do not look anything like I imagined when I spoke to you on the telephone." Or this day is much darker and gloomier than the day yesterday and the day before. So we often, not as often as speech, but quite often use the idea that our thinking is consisting of colors, images, borders, tonalities. All sorts of different things. That give language its an additive, it has its own rules. There is a language game on this. This is going to be complex. There is a language game on how you describe your thoughts with expressions of pictures, images. It has its specific rules. Not a very good example, but you can't say to someone, this doesn't look like the table you want to sell me on internet. Now I look at it, I just see a complete red color all over the experience. No, there are very strict rules, and they all come from the outside, how you use pictures in your inner language to explain things. You can say that these rules have evolved over time. And become incredibly complicated in the end. This complexity, of course, is one of the reasons, both when it comes to the example of thinking as inner speech and thinking as pictures, that we confuse the two. We confuse thinking with how we describe thinking, and we say that thinking is pictures. This is the very moment where all the problems starts. So to speak, you will always be a little bit off in your doings when this misunderstanding is established, or when it captures you with this picture of the world, hypnotizes you. Rather, as written by Johnston on page 69, on the contrary, the natural conclusion is that thinking is something over and above speech. Like mental images, or the pictures our words seem dead unless backed up by thought. So that if you get hypnotized by the picture, happen to be the word picture once more, it will block out clear views to some extent. I wouldn't say only it blocks out understanding, but clear thought will not be able in the same way to come to the fore. Your use of words and your way of handling your own thinking will be impeded. A little bit like you want to throw a bowling ball in the bowling alley, and just in the moment you're supposed to throw, you add a sort of textual thinking, you would call it reflection, and I would say that wouldn't really be thinking. It would be inside your head, but not what makes you perfectly able to toss the bowling ball, but a disruption, an impediment to the act, a disturbance of not a positive kind. It doesn't add anything. Of working things doesn't have a quality to it. Now, we can say this: the confounding and the hypnosis of the picture will impede your acts, make them slower, clumsier, whereas the understanding will stop you from, if you like, interfere in your perfectly working thinking process, and you can say you could even let them be much more what they are. They would be free to be themselves to a greater extent. You can compare the misunderstanding to that you have broken your arm, you went to the hospital, and they had it fixed and put in the cast, and then it heals. And once it's healed, the cast will just be, it will be an impediment to your movements of the arm. The method, if you like, of Wittgenstein is slowly cutting up the cask with these wonderful saw-like machines that are so scary. And all of a sudden there is loads more movement possible. You can let the arm be the arm, do its things in its proper position. Its range of movement will be largely extended. You will add 180 or even more degrees of freedom to your arm. And once this freedom is established, that will be a starting point for acquiring even more freedom. For new possibilities. So never think about Wittgenstein as a limitation. It is constantly bringing things forward, upwards, to more possibilities. And just like the sight, on the contrary, the natural conclusion is that thinking is something over and above speech. You will be able to enter into the well of those energies and possibilities that are in language, and it seems very likely once you leave thinking as it is, also your ability to handle how you talk about thinking, which is also important, will be enhanced. It will be more accurate. You develop more skills since now you know the working process more correctly. The confusion costs a lot of energy, takes a lot of effort to keep it up. Once that, so to speak, falls to the side, you will put your efforts in the place where it's suitable, where it serves a purpose. It is like clearly understanding the working of a complex machine or a tool. I can compare it to painting, where slowly, by understanding more and more of the details of painting, I get more into the ability of freely expressing myself. I don't take away possibilities, rather I add them. More come to the fore. There's, so to speak, more to play with. I think that is a rather apt comparison to what rules are. It's like more brushes to play with, more color tones to add in, more additives, mediums to adjust the liquidity, the fluidity, the viscosity of the painting, of the paint, so that you can form your brush strokes more as you like it, as you prefer. You can see all these cumbersome things to learn, all the brushes, there is a lot of them, all the different mediums. I have at least 20 paints, 60, 70. From a certain perspective you can see these as restrictions, like the rules in language, in the language games. But far from limiting anything, these are the opening of more possibilities. I like the idea of comparing it, comparing the rules to levers that brings things higher up to the next arrival point. You will never be stranded in the point of origin, a departure that never happens. A little pointer to this is further down on page 69. However, when we try to isolate thought from what it accompanies, nothing is left. the relation of thought to its manifestation is not like that between the words of a song and the music, but like that between the expression with which the music is played and the music itself. Thinking in this case, to continue with the comparison, is the expression. What makes the music be alive is more than the notes, the music, the instruments. It's the expression. And the expression is like the thinking. We have the words, but we have something beyond them and above them. I really like that quote from Johnston. It constantly brings a thrust to everything. That is most definitely the forward movement. That forward movement of free thinking or encouraged thinking. It can be reasonable to think that the rules help the thinking to be free, although I don't think it is not healthy to say that there is a connection in between thinking itself and how we talk about it. But I think a free ruling makes thinking use the rules more to its advantage. There will be more success, more development. To a greater extent, for every success you will be strengthened as a person when you're handling how you talk, following the rules, using them, as I compared with handling brushes. The successes strengthens the system. Makes it work better, makes its working much better. So this opening up of understanding is not philosophy in the old way, where you just acquire an argument, you accept it, you like it, you take in the propositions, but nothing in the terms of use, how you actually use your language, yourself, does change. It's a bit, as I was a bit mean last time mentioning Bertrand Russell, and he changed philosophical attitudes more often than most people change their coats. I think it was about almost a dozen times. The most funny circumstance was when he became a solipsist, and he held a very encouraging lecture on solipsism, and after the lecture a lady came to him and said, "I did appreciate the lecture, but there really should be more of us solipsists in the world." I think that constant looking for new stimulations are superficial, and this is substantial in quite a different way, nurturing. There's a thing from page 70. As Wittgenstein notes, the puzzle is that I can speak mechanically and non-mechanically, but I cannot find anything that's essential for the difference. Furthermore, as with thinking and its expression, there is a conflict between the desire to treat meaning as something independent of the words we utter, and our sense that the two are inseparable. On the one hand, when we utter a meaningful sentence, it seems that some act or process of meaning imbues these sounds with sense. On the other hand, no such act or process can be separated off from the actual use of language. It's almost like language gets marinated or invigorated by thinking, and that they in some way are separable or different, but simultaneously we realize no separation can ever be possible. And I think that is one of the factors that most definitely makes it so easy to, while they're both the same and they are both different, it is a tricky thing. And once you start seeing that they are the same, that they have this almost magical thing of only sameness, that's a problem. But it's also problematic if they are completely different as well. I put a little pause here, I'll continue promptly. Thank you very much for that first take. Come back just to get some refreshing tea here. Let's see if I can manage to handle the tea. I will now take up the aspect of the lightning speed of thought, as Wittgenstein called it. Thinking can come in a second. A puzzle, for example, becomes clear in a flash, as we read from page 72, or we suddenly see the solution to a complex problem which has long troubled us. Here, thought seems to outstrip language, and hence it is natural to ask if the same thing happens in lightning-like thought, only extremely accelerated, as when we talk and think we talk. So that in the first case the clockwork runs down all at once, but in the second, bit by bit, breaked by the words. And just adding here, although it might seem uncommon, it is a phenomenon that is very common in our lives. We think incredibly quick, and I would say that takes away both the ideas of language as a picture and the idea that language is inner speech. insights come in a flash, and a whole discourse can be in a flash, and we can, oddly enough, so to speak, explain what we had in mind. If we get interrupted or we choose to do something else, we can most often give an account of what we were about to do and say. It's almost like thinking explodes. Yeah, this is extremely interesting. It's an example here, almost like the one I mentioned. If, for example, someone is interrupted, she will generally be able to explain what she was going to say even before she has said it. If, for example, someone is interrupted, she will generally be able to explain what she was going to say, what she was meaning to say. It is as if the sentence were completed before it was even uttered. It never came to fruition, and still it was ready, like a germ. And I think this is one more of the reasons why we think that maybe thinking is an incredibly condensed form of inner speech. It's concentrated almost to be a black hole. But I think once more this shows the absolute different nature of thinking. It doesn't have neither spatial extension, nor does it have, in some ways, temporal extension. Everything happens at once. This simultaneous working is one of the reasons why it's so absolutely important or beneficial to understand the proper working. One thing I was pondering was, if we have a misunderstanding that language is that thinking is language, it wouldn't be likely that we in an effective way would be able to harvest the fruits of thinking. I think about the genius Mozart, who had a concerto in an inkling of a minute ready. All he had to do was to write it down. If he would have thought that the concerto was in its proper form already in the mind, it wouldn't fit the mind, so to speak. It would become overcrowded directly. I think the hypnotism, if you like, of the picture makes it extremely hard to... It fills the mental space, if you like, with all details, all the gazillions words and information bit, for instance, as in the example with the concerto of Mozart. All those things sort of pile upon each other, and it causes density. They will in the end hinder the sheer weight of all the words, pictures, notes. It's not very hard to imagine how that will bring down the things. We become less flexible. We become Mike Tyson heavyweight. It's fair to say we will hinder ourselves with a mistaken picture. Not letting things be, and a sort of interference will already have been established. An interference that is not only beneficial. So I would say I would expand the things beyond only that the confusion creates philosophical problems. It's actually much more to it than that. What Wittgenstein brings into the discourse is clarity, and all of a sudden it's easier to direct things, to be on top of things, to be in command. As the confusion obfuscate makes deeper understanding harder to enter into. It's a limitation, quite on the contrary, that the rules are borders that looks like limitations but actually makes it possible to do so much more. And that realization comes first when you really get into the thinking. This is how ideas come to the fore. The idea forces itself on one. Of the gap of which James speaks, which only this word will fit into, and so on. One is somehow, as it were, already experiencing the word. And I might, of course, also say that I experience a growing meaning or growing explanation of meaning. It's a growing germ, as said here on page 73. But then, what does that really mean, going down to the bottom? It is like we have access to this fantastic well, and things are eternally growing out of this well. As a cornucopia of unlimited resources. And it's right there in our own innerness or outerness. enlarged understanding makes it possible to venture into the depths of creativity. That magnificent source will open itself up once we understand the proper workings, and we no longer impede with it. It bears some similarities on a simpler level to what the creationist or creative philosopher, author of many books, the British Maltese genius, I would say, started out in neurology, Edward de Bono, said that all creativity is from the beginning not understandable. And he meant words, well, also pictures, I would imagine. Later, as here, there is a growing sense of meaning. There are more words coming out. Later they can be explained, but the explanation is only coming afterwards, not before. It is important to understand this turn of things. First comes the creativity, and then the whole string of words, like Mozart's concertos. They get expanded into notes, texts, melodies, octaves, and so forth, to sort of expand into the written partiture, I think it's called. But starting with partitures from others or from oneself will not lead to a new concerto, a creative step forward. And here what I mean that the confusion can cause, or is causing, because it's constantly already active. If you put your energy in the ready-made things, for instance, the idea that words are imagery, pictures, photos, or that words are the smallest atom of thinking, you could block out access to the creativity pole and the creativity well, the source of everything, from where it's all stemming. Understanding that both of them are necessary, but in the right order, once more opens up for creativity. The openness. When you see what state of minds are conducive for creativity to come to the fore. I would say that inner well is maybe the most important feature of being human. So it's not a small thing, and are regularly confusing the order of things to say that, oh, it all originates in words or pictures, images, will cast a blockage, a confinement on the whole openness, and that is not conducive to the genie in the bottle, so to say, of thinking. It harbors so much more than can be expressed. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't express it. No, on the contrary, expression is also helpful. But if they are let to come into a proper, reasonable order, it will work much better. It will be a smoothness and less of an interference in the true order of things. You will no longer, I would say, you no longer would go against the rules, but take advantage of them. See them, as I said earlier, as the pencils and brushes and paint mediums as incredibly helpful tools that make much more things possible. Contrast that to the regular idea that the idea is just in there and the tools are just unnecessary accompaniments. They are the tools for expressing it. No, they participate as well. They are not related in the way that one is origin and the other is cause, effect. One is origin, the other is copy of thought, as Plato would have it. Or one is causative, and the ready-made painting or the concerto is the effect. What Wittgenstein is pointing to is that they don't have to be related. It's better to let them be what they are. Give them their freedom. Liberate them from cause and effect, so to speak. So they can be individual entities, and in that way they can do their best work. It would be an impediment to bind the creativity base of thinking, the ever expanding and immense well of possibilities, and give it a straitjacket of that those are thoughts in a very condensed format. I do think this is a liberating tendency. We have on page 74 in the Mystery of Thought. According to Wittgenstein, the best way to understand meaning is to consider who did not experience meaning would be like. And this is in line with the aspect line. Now we have the meaning blind. Another helpful tool in understanding these rather tough and complex things. Here's a quote from Remarks on the Philosophy of Psychology, Volume 1. If you say, as I heard this word, it meant, for me you refer to a point of time and to an employment of the word. The remarkable thing about it is, of course, the relation to the point of time. And oddly enough, this also refers to and occurs in respect to past expressions. It doesn't have to be in the future projection only. These two phenomena would be inaccessible to the meaning blind. He can either say I meant or I'm going to mean. Neither of these examples will hold for the meaning blind. Not past and not future. So there is a sort of timing thing here. See it as you are playing drums and your beat needs to be in concord, in accord with the rest of the band if you play four, 5 people. This is sort of the meaning line is beating out of beat. And not properly understanding the true working order of things is causing the same thing. A sort of deep misunderstanding, and you will put one leg in front of the other in the wrong order, so you will cause your own fall. You can still say I meant to say, or I will need to say, I was going to say, and all those things without them being condensed black holes of conglomerated words. Instead, there is a interesting thing here, the consciousness come into the picture, but not consciousness in the idea that it's a mysterious inner thing, but consciousness as participating in the things of the world, doing things in the world, being involved. And consciousness is not pure meaning, whatever that would be. It is the interaction of language, of thinking, of pictures, of imagery, of all the rules of the language game, of the different tools that are so extremely helpful to us and makes it possible to always go forward. And in the meaning blind is as hinted from remarks from the philosophy of psychology. Consciousness get eliminated in the aspect blind. Consciousness is exactly that flux of meaning and different expressions, where we don't get stuck in a monasemic take on what a word means. Oh, say that. And of course this bears down on the current discussion on AI, artificial intelligence. It seems that the constructors or the believers in AI seem to think that you can do away with meaning or thinking somehow. That to just accumulate all the different ready-made words. And it is, of course, if you really believe in this, that will create intelligence, you are also well into the confounding of how we speak about something and what it is. That thinking is in the same way as we speak about it. But it would be like the aspect blind. It would be compelling sometimes. It would be almost beautiful word formulations. I've already seen that, but it will be lack in novelty, not creative in any other way than that it is putting together things already expanded earlier. As I said, it's like building a concerto from the old pieces of previous composers, putting them together using scissors and glue, cutting pieces out, gluing them together, and say, oh, here I created a new masterpiece. But it wouldn't be a masterpiece, it would be a concoction of all things. The creative act, if it's there, will construct something entirely new. Of course, you could use the parts of old, but it doesn't stop there. It starts in reaching for the very source, the source. Goes to the marrow, if that rather cumbersome word is used. And he is, as mentioned in the first quote on page 75, that he has his intentions in the form of thoughts or pictures, and hence that they would always be replaceable by the speaking of a sentence or the seeing of a picture. The lightning speed of thought is missing in him. And all this, as Edvard de Bono would call it, asymmetric thinking is gone. Or Derridian expression, all the difference is out of the picture, and you have just sheer one-sidedness. the meaning blind is the same as AI. It has access to some of the rules of language, but I would say that the whole complexity of the language games is nothing less than the whole world. And I would say there is I wouldn't say connection, but some sort of thing between thinking and the language game rules of the outer. They need to be there without a demand for cause and effect. And I will compare that to a previous example I read when we discussed memory. And Wittgenstein has there an example that someone has to make scribbles at the same time when he is reciting, but there is no connection between the scribbles and what he's saying. And in that example, it was used as to showing memory, or the engravings in our brain, if you like, are not condensates of experiences. They do not contain all that happened in an inscribed form, but the scribblings are still necessary. And I would say the same applies here. The full complexity of the language games has a relation or some sort of helping force to the thinking itself. As I said earlier, it's this feeling of success in itself makes you go up. You raise yourself out to yourself. You get a directedness. And that is quite different from this passivity of cause and effect. It has a difference. We could actually say that the subject comes into the picture. Maybe that's a preempted simplification of something that is much more difficult, almost fractal in structure. But it has some sense to it, definitely. Somewhere in that region, and I think I mentioned that to properly do your job as a policeman, you need a uniform, not only to show to others. The uniform is like the scribbles on the paper. There is no connection whatsoever in the terms of cause and effect between the uniform and the ability to be a law enforcer. But it still needs to be there. Can you see now more the difference between cause and effect, origin, what it amounts to, origin, copy, germ, fruition, and compare that? They are both there, they are unrelated. You cannot investigate the uniform to find out what the policeman is doing. what his job is. You cannot take the button on his cap and remove it with a knife, put it onto the microscope or X-ray it. It wouldn't even make any sense, as you can hear. And this is how the language games are, in general. Like something almost introductory, that there are similarities, but it doesn't mean that they are all the same. Like games themselves, if you get too far from, you have at both ends of games, you have things that you would never ever say are of the same category. They are there at the same time or in the same place, and they have many times superficial features that make us come to the conclusion that there must be an origin. And of course, this is something that has been accelerated in the modern era of scientific explanations. Never ever have the demand for scientific explanations been greater than it is today. All what we constructed or that has been constructed has, yes, a purpose, a design, so to speak. It has an idea, and you can trick yourself into making an unlawful transfer directly from the machine to the human being and say, maybe each human being was constructed for a certain purpose, and let's go inside to check for in the brain of the inscribings, what is the reason. And of course, in this understanding, we see the meaning as the origin of the words. First, the meaning came about, and they sort of evolved into spoken language, acts, happenings, doings. All those things are firmly situated on a long background story that goes all the way back into antiquity and brings all features of looking for first cause, originals, the Platonic idea of the absolute ulterior meaning of everything. I will start an endless quest. Further down on page 75, Wittgenstein runs into some problems. I think that makes it so much more interesting. The problem here is that Wittgenstein, we've been speaking about asking someone where he's going. The meaning blind would stare at one as if he was sleepwalking. But he will not answer, I don't know either. Or will his proceedings strike him or us as planless? I don't see why. And the problem here, as Johnston writes, the problem here is that Wittgenstein wants the meaning blind man to be able to express present informations in the normal way, but only wants him to be able to express past intentions when he explicitly has them in the form either of an image or a piece of inner speech. As a consequence of this, however, is that the meaning blind man cannot offer a continuous account of his past, and hence the intentionality of his actions is undermined. If someone asks him, "Where are you going?" I want to assume that he answers just as we do. But he will also say, "As I left the house, I was meaning to go to the baker, but now." No, but ought we to say that on that account he set out on his way as it were sleepwalking? So he goes from having purposes and then going into fits of strange automatism. And he notes this point. Wittgenstein is struck by a further doubt, for if this conception of meaning blindness makes sense, isn't it remarkable that in all the great variety of mankind we do not meet such people as this? Or are there such people among the mental defectives? And is it merely not sufficiently observed which language games these are capable of and which not? So we never encounter those peoples, and it makes sense. It's like it's coming and going. First they have intentions, and then all of a sudden they will be more like automata, having no purpose all of a sudden, and then go back into purpose. The meaning blindness in this take is in itself, they are in itself too paradoxical to exist. It's like there's somebody behind the meaning blind to push him at some instance, and then the pusher goes away, and the meaning blind only continues with the momentum he acquired from the pusher, and when that's gone, he will stop automatically, slowly but certainly. I hope you found this rather interesting, well, at least to some degree. Sorry it was a lot of retakes, but I find it so compelling, the text, so it's well worth diving even deeper into. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for listening in. And that is the end of 1648 of the Heidegger series. And I will continue this 1649, I would think. Have a very pleasant day or night, wherever you are. We finally got some sunshine here after a couple of days of rain, compared to the clearing up of Wittgenstein and Johnston. Bye bye.